Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Tap it. No, welcome back. We're excited to watch this movie. I know you're all probably stoned because you read what the movie is, so that's fine. It's okay. I don't expect you to go crazy, but you know. Anyway, thanks. So this is a really special, fun presentation that's unlike any other movie that we've shown for Science on Screen. Because what it sort of represents is a posthumous collaboration. It's both a music film and sort of, you might call it visual music, a sort of repurposing of films that were created for scientific reasons to just be there functioning together with music, together as a really sort of special new artifact, like a recontextualization of this existing artifact. So it's a collaboration between the band Tindersticks, who many of you know for their, probably you may know their soundtracks as well as anything else, led by Stuart A. Staples, who directed what you're about to see, or put it all together, I should say. Various other musical collaborators, and the long-deceased naturalist, photographer, and filmmaker Frank Percy Smith, F. Percy Smith. Smith was not a scientist by training, much to his regret, but you know, British class system, what are you going to do? Worked for the British Board of Education as a clerk, but by night he was taking photographs. He was experimenting with photographs. He was a microscope nerd, if you can imagine such a thing. But at the time, microscopes were sort of hard to come by. He had a microscope, he had a camera, he was adapting lenses, he was adapting like shutter speeds and all kinds of stuff so he could photograph using microscopes. And he believed strongly in the possibilities of this microscopic photography for educational and research applications. His photographs attracted the attention of a film producer named Charles Urban, who signed him up to make short films to be exhibited in cinemas. We're talking about like 1910. So cinemas were wild in 1910. Like you were wild enough, you were just like, oh, give us a photo, give us like a time lapse of like aphids being born, and people would show up by the millions and buy popcorn and watch aphids being born. During World War II, he signed up and he used photography. He became even better at photography because he was using it for reconnaissance and other, chemical examination of small things, and he got even better at it. And he got a lot of money from the British government for doing this, and developed even more new techniques. And then after that, he got signed up by the company British Instructional Films, and that was where he spent the rest of his working life making popular films. So these were films at this point that would go around to school systems, that would go around and play in colleges, so that people could sort of understand these processes. And there's nothing like movies for actually kind of spelling out these processes and seeing how they go. He invented many of the techniques that he uses that you'll see in these films and then throughout his career. And he could spend as long as 2.5 years on a single short, like 4-minute film. Imagine spending 2 years just from time lapse, just from taking like a photo every day, let's say. And he would set it all up in his home, which was not a luxurious home. So you can imagine, it was probably pretty tough. His work represents a crux between science popularization and study. Our guest tonight, Dr. Alex Wild. Where are you, Alex? Right over here. Yeah, Alex Wild. He's going to join us after the show. Yeah. Some of you know him already. But after the show, he's going to come up. He operates in some of the same territory. He's a biologist, a curator of entomology in the University of Texas Department of Integrative Biology, and starting with his work on ant taxonomy and evolution, he's also discovered a passion for photography, microscopic and otherwise, that has made him a popular and sought-after photographer whose work has appeared in natural history museums, magazines, books, on television and film, and of course, the internet, where you can find some of his work at alexanderwild.com. So he's going to come up after the show. We're going to kind of talk about sort of what we watched, the role of photography in science, how it all kind of feeds into itself, and we're going to look at some of Alex's photographs and discuss them. So hang around after the show. It's a short movie. It's about 55 minutes long, and we hope to talk to you guys and engage in a conversation afterwards. Thanks, everybody, for coming. I hope you enjoy it.
I'd like to now bring to the stage our special guest, Dr. Alex Wild. Come on up. And by the way, if I was reading a novel and there was a super cool biologist / nature photographer named Alex Wild, I'd throw the book down. I'd be like, that's too on the nose. I could never believe that.
I have a friend named Andrea Lucky, and we keep meaning to publish a paper together, Wild and Lucky.
Is it better to be wild or lucky in this life?
I don't know. We're both. See, the thing is, we're both ant biologists, and do you know about tramp ants?
No.
Yeah. So anyway, there's this group of ants that travel around the world that are kind of mildly pesty, but they don't cause huge problems like fire ants. So we just say they tramp around. Anyway, Andrew and I were going to publish this paper, "The Tramp Ants of Las Vegas" by Wild and Lucky. Still hasn't happened yet, but we're working on it.
I look forward to that.
Yeah.
I don't read a whole lot of entomological papers, but that's one I'll definitely make time for. That movie is really something else. It's pretty amazing. They put that movie out. Kids watched it and everything. It's shocking.
Plants are freaky.
They really are.
Yeah. Is there a question there, or you
No,
just
I
want
just
some
thought
commentary?
I just thought I would, kind of point out the sort of elephant in the room, which is that like that movie is just wall to wall sex. It really is.
Well, life is wall-to-wall sex for most things. I mean, if you...
For most things. What about the rest of us? It's no picnic, I'm telling you. But no, the movie, it really is. Like, we're being funny, but, like, there's so much of, like, what you're interested in if you're a plant, what you're doing, what your time is spent on is reproducing.
Well, yeah, I mean, in the beginning, everything was reproduction. It still is, but... it's gotten more complicated as we're competing with each other. And I mean this in a biological sense, like we as an animals competing with other things and all that. But yeah. What was interesting to me about looking at the old footage, this is kind of a technical comment that relates to the biology, is a lot of the techniques in the film were time-lapse, which is individual photographs taken in a moment and then pieced together to be sped up. And this has the effect of allowing us to see things that are happening at a pace that's not ours. And it's so easy for us to just walk by that bush and just see it's just sitting there, not moving, inert. But it isn't. If we just watch it in its own time, there's a lot of stuff going on. I mean, that stuff is often sex, but we.
Yeah, and the whole reason that we do anything is usually sex and nourishment and, fear of predators, right?
Yes?
Yeah. What's this about?
Sorry, got me going there for a bit. But
but it really, we see it in slow, like we see ivy, which I guess is ivy, like these different little strands of plants, and they're doing this incredibly graceful dance if we speed it up.
Yeah, well, a lot of the plants he filmed were actually vining plants. So things like, peas and beans. You got any gardeners here? Right, you plant peas, you put in things for them to climb on, and that's how they get sunlight, which is how they make more plant, which is how they get more resources for seeds and stuff. And so what you see is this gyration of the plant looking for something to climb on, to hook into. So when you see that kind of rhythmic, it's that searching for a foothold.
Because that's just kind of, I assume if I keep doing this, I'll find something to grab onto, I guess.
You will actually. If you're in a, it's basically you're in a dark room.
Yeah.
You don't know what you're doing. The plants are kind of like doing this to see if they find something to grab onto, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and they fall right over. But
it's miraculous, and that's what the photography shows us. I mean, because it's doing this, it's just so much slower than we would ever perceive. And it's interesting also, I think. Hello. Who is it? Well, hang on a second. We'll talk about this in a minute. But it's really interesting that you see, like when you look at it, it almost is sort of inadvertent art. But then, is it inadvertent art, or is it intentional art in a way that you're doing when you're photographing something like this? Which we happen to be looking at one of your photographs right now. I wonder if it's maybe kind of a good leading off point for us to talk about what do we do when we depict photographically biological processes. Tell us what this is, by the way.
This is a slime mold. Anyone here heard of a slime mold? Yeah, a bunch of biologists.
It's a real fan club here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was I think my favorite part of the film was the slime mold segment. Those were those reticulated nets of pulsating material that was kind of oozing its way, and then that black mass that was crossing the bridge and sliming over. That was a slime mold, and these are amazing animals. Not animals. They're slime molds. They're their own thing. Biologists are really interested in these because if you're interested in the question of how complex multicellular life came to be, I mean, it seems like this big mystery. We have primordial slime, and then we have people, and then, of course, that couldn't happen, so whatever. How do you study that? Well, it turns out there are organisms out there that are both complex multicellular organisms and single-cell amoebae that kind of just ooze around on their own. And the slime mold is one of those things where much of its life are actually individual free agent cells doing their own thing, going along in the leaf litter or in rotting logs, eating stuff. But then every once in a while, they band together and become this sort of social single organism made up of these individual parts. And when food runs out, and what you're seeing here is, see that mass out of focus in the foreground. When the food runs out, the slime mold decides it's time to turn into spores to disperse elsewhere and reproduce. And so they glob up and start forming these little stalks. That was one thing in the movie. This picture was actually taken in a lab colony at Washington University in St. Louis. A still photo doesn't show it the same way that a time-lapse film does. And so here I've had to try to portray the time as in sort of spatially, because the different parts of the slime mold colony were doing it at different times. And so you can kind of get the progression. Yeah, next one, keep going, yeah. So anyway, so I just have a couple shots of these stalks forming. This one's doing a Hershey Kiss impersonation. Next. Yep, and then they start forming these complex structures, and the question that's vexed a lot of evolutionary biologists is, why do any of these sort of single-celled critters form the stalk at the base? Because they are dead. They do not form spores. All they do is assist the other ones in raising up off the ground. And then, next slide. Next one back. Yeah, and so you can see in various stages, the ones that form the stalk basically are sort of a dead end. And so it's been this puzzle of how do you get this altruistic behavior, this sacrifice, to help some of the other ones reproduce. So anyway, these kind of weird creatures, which are really fun to watch in these time lapses, have been pretty fundamental to answering some pretty big questions about what life is, how complex life is able to exist as a cooperative venture. Anyway.
Are there theories about the altruism in the wild? Because I guess ants, there's probably elements of what ants do.
Yeah, this is exactly the same question, is why ant colonies form, and why multicellular things form, why genes link up to form chromosomes. So it's a lot of these evolutionary questions boil down to the same thing, as why do independent entities cooperate and sacrifice for something? And part of the answer seems to be they're related, and so they're helping, they're basically copies of themselves that are going on to reproduce, so that they keep on going. But there's lots of arguments and surprisingly personal disagreements, and people yelling at each other in the otherwise stoic scientific literature about this question. So I'm just going to leave that be.
Maybe we won't solve that one tonight. Maybe this has been a big bone of contention for a while, I imagine.
This is, I mean, there are debates starting pretty much in the 1960s, 1970s that ended up spilling over into popular culture to the point that one scientist, Ed Wilson, actually got a pitcher of water dumped on his head at one point by communists who thought he was helping, I don't know what he... Anyway, the whole thing was contentious and still is.
We could spend a little more time on this. If you no, I think we should leave it. We should just look up that guy, Ed who?
Ed Wilson,
Ed
E.O.
Wilson.
Wilson. Yeah, there was
E.O.
actually
Wilson.
a profile of him in, was it Guardian yesterday? He's like about 90. And
He survived the attack?
he did survive the
Okay,
vicious
that's-
water attack.
that's good.
He did, yeah.
Okay, that's good to know.
Hmm?
It was a woman because he said something that women didn't care for because it implied that
The biology, and they had no agency. Yeah, boy. Yeah. So these evolutionary arguments really touch on a lot of sort of sensitive and culture war areas, and and he's still bothering people with various.
How interesting.
Yeah.
I'm going to move to our next slide because we have we had a little tease of what we have next. What is this? Who is this little fella?
This is someone that you all should know because this is the most abundant terrestrial animal. So there are potentially millions of these in a standard lawn. And does anyone know what these are? Raise your hand if you recognize them. But they're pretty small, that's the thing. This is an animal called a springtail, and most are about 1 millimeter or 2 long. And they're called a springtail because if you bother them, they can actually spring into the air. They have a little structure on the underside that releases like a trap, and they can bounce up. I just like showing this photo because it's a really common life form that's super interesting. They do these some of them do these fancy courtship dances. The males of some species make what's called love gardens, where they leave little sperm on stalks and then they lead the female in. Anyways, all this really cool, weird stuff happening just under our feet if we look for it, and this is something we can find locally.
All right, you can find them locally if you have really good eyesight, or if you have a strong, a magnifying lens, which I gather you.
No,
use.
like I was at Home Slice Pizza the other day, hanging out at the playground, just looking at my daughter, who's 5, was looking at the brick wall that looked like nothing. And she's like, "Dad, what are these bugs?" I'm like, "There's no bug." And I looked really close, and there were hundreds of these little guys just kind of cruising around on the brick wall.
All right. Well, that sounds like a Yelp review. Let's see. Let's move forward. What do we got here?
So who knows what this is? Raise your hand if you recognize this animal. You would recognize the adult. It's big and orange and black and flies to Mexico every winter. This is a monarch caterpillar. And it's one of these common iconic species, and we think we know things about it, but I like showing this to point out a really interesting behavior that is really vital to its survival that many people don't actually know. Shout out the host plant. What do the monarchs eat? Milkweed, yeah. And so milkweed is called milkweed because of why? Yeah, you break a leaf, get all this goopy sap, and that sap is kind of like glue. It'll gum up the mouth parts of the caterpillar, make everything really difficult to eat. And in fact, a milkweed can kill a monarch trying to feed on it. So this is a very, very young monarch caterpillar. It's not even a day old, and it has done something called trenching. So down towards the ground here, if you were to follow this off, is the main leaf vein that goes down to the roots. And so we have all of the pressure, the water pressure of pushing this latex up from the ground. And the caterpillar, the first thing it does is it digs a trench to break all the veins and reduce the pressure inside the veins, pushing this latex. And that gives us its safe little island that's not going to ooze sap, so it can have its first meal of a non-gluey leaf. So this is called trenching. So if you get monarchs in your garden, look for these little characteristic C-shaped cuts. That's allows the monarch to survive.
I don't get a lot of chances to talk to biologists, so forgive me. How do they know to do that? Where does that stuff stored? How do they like that's in their software somehow?
Well, they break out of the egg and they go to YouTube and they look for trenching.
How does this stuff work? Because that's a little bitty thing. Like it has all that information there. It knows to do all this stuff.
Well, that's a very good question, and I don't know. There are thousands
of
of
you people know. I mean, oh no, we just don't.
Well, this
know.
is like the
Yeah,
fundamental
yeah.
question.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, where does instinct
Sorry,
come from? I mean,
know.
the big answer is billions of these things have been alive over thousands and thousands of generations, and the ones that don't know how to do it die. So they end up, natural selection ends up honing these behaviors. That's like the big answer that we seem obviously correct. But if you look at the details of each one, there are millions of years of lab work and field work and careful observational work and hypothesis testing and statistical tests and all that you can go into to actually figure out, the details of any particular case.
So no female monarch wants to go on a date with like a male monarch who doesn't know how to trench, basically. And so he just kind of just doesn't propagate. Is that it, or am I just simplifying it?
That could be it, although the
Or-
female probably can't. If the male didn't know how to trench, he wouldn't be there. So the elimination.
'Cause he'd be
would pro-
dead.
He'd be dead. Yeah,
And
he would
that's
never have
another
made it
turn-off.
past this. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, you never know. You never
Yeah,
know.
All right. Let's move to the next slide. Oh,
Hi.
what is this?
This is the bold jumper, Phidippus audax. It's a face view of a jumping spider, and this is a fairly common spider. I see it around town a bit, and this spider has amazing eyesight. It's got 8 eyes. You can see 4 of them here really clearly. You can kind of see 2 out of focus off to the side, and there's 2 on the back of the head. So this spider can essentially see everything. And it turns out that 6 of these eyes, the small ones, the 4 you can't see, and the 2 off to the side are like fisheye lenses that they sort of get this really broad view. And these big eyes that are staring you down, those are like binoculars, a very long and narrow field of vision. They're essentially like these little telescopes. And when they detect something they want to look at, they will turn their body and then sort of focus in on with those big eyes to look at things. And they can actually look around, not moving like we move our eyeballs around and look at things. Spiders can do that too, but they don't move. But they have this exoskeleton like armor that's the front of the eye. They actually move their retina around, so they can actually move the back of the eye to look at things. But there was a researcher in Pennsylvania studying these, and she noticed that she was studying the behavior, the courtship behavior, how males and females behave. And she did that through videotaping them and watching the playback and figuring out what they were doing. And she noticed one day, looking back at the spiders in the cages, that they were watching the videos too. And most animals can't watch television because their frame rate's really different. So they, we film movies at 24 frames a second standardly because that works well with human cognition. But we're weird. Most animals, if you were to play them a video with that frame rate, see flickering. That's why it's harder to interest your dog in watching television because they just can't see it properly. It's kind of annoying and flickery. But it turns out that spiders can watch TV. So if you're looking for a business idea, there's not much good programming for spiders. But anyway, spider vision's a great subject. But anyway, let's look at the next slide.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is a different species of jumping spider. But one thing that jumping spiders are looking for with their amazing vision is other spiders, because they are vicious little creatures that eat each other all the time. And so spiders will, for the most part, really keep their distance. And jumping spiders in particular, because they have amazing vision, will spend a lot of energy to stay far away from other jumping spiders, which is why a whole bunch of tasty little insects, next slide, try to look like jumping spiders. Do you see it? Do you see the spider in the wings of this moth? It's even got little glints of light. So go back to the last slide. See, look at the legs and the eyes, right? Now go to the next one. And you can even see in the wing the little leg patterns. So this moth can avoid being eaten because it looks a bit like a jumping spider. So a jumping spider is not going to want to get too close to it in case it gets eaten.
So that's a lot of generations of evolution that rewards like this kind of stuff, right? Like, it's
Yeah, there are a lot of
unbelievable.
moths where it's just a numbers game. So if you have enough individuals and enough time, you can pretty much, turns out, do almost anything.
Especially because their generations are very short, I imagine.
It depends on the insect, but yeah, some of them can whip through, a dozen generations in a year. Some are actually quite slow. There are ants out there that are over 30 years old. And there's termites that live for 60 years. And then, of course, there's the 17-year cicadas. So some of them are a bit slower than we think. But yeah, most of them are quick. But they all have pretty big numbers.
But that allows for all of these sort of like just evolutionary, just like a lot of evolutionary options to kind of whip through there.
Yes,
Yeah.
it does. And there's so many variations out there, and tons of stuff like this no one's even looked at. I mean, there's way more of these cool little natural history stories out there than people looking for them. So you can go out and find new things pretty much regularly.
How interesting. Let's see. And then, oh my
Oh,
God.
here's an example. Yeah. So
This is at Torchy's, I think, right? Outside of Torchy's?
little queso balls. Yeah. So this is a termite nest in Illinois, and the big termitey things are termites, but you see some white egg-looking things and some orange egg-looking things. And I had no idea what the orange egg-looking things were, because most insect eggs are kind of white. But I did some searching around. It turns out there's a research group in Japan that's tried to figure out what these orange things are. It turns out it's a fungus whose relationship to the termites is not quite clear, whether it just sort of generally eats things in the nest, but it avoids being cleaned out by smelling and feeling just like a termite egg. I mean, they're a different color, but termites are blind, so they can't tell. So this is an egg-mimicking fungus that, gets this great climate-controlled place to live. I mean, social insects do a great job of maintaining these great growth conditions, and the fungus can just sort of persist in there.
Why are termites colorless and almost sort of translucent?
So the color on an insect is related to many things, but often just in terms of dark light, it has to do with how thick their exoskeleton is, that external armor. And insects that live in really sheltered places tend not to need that really expensive armor, and so they will be, they're protected by their nest in these underground tunnels, so they're actually just kind of soft. They're good eating. If you were to survive on an insect, termites are a good bet. See, this was educational. Aren't you glad you came?
Like apes eat termites, right?
Everything eats termites.
Yeah,
I mean, termites are one of nature's great foods. They're they're abundant. They're soft, and they don't have anything nasty chemicals. Yeah,
easy to find because they have no protective coloration. Maybe should just for the suggestion box. Let's see what else we got here. All right, who's this?
Oh yeah. So this is a recently dead carpenter ant. And we can see, now here's one I would love to get a time lapse of. You can see the very beginnings of the fungal hyphae starting to come out of the head capsule. And having just seen this great film where we see those molds start to sprout, you can see what's going to happen here. But this is a specialist ant-killing fungus that gets into the ant's body, starts eating it from the inside, and it eventually directs the ant by manipulating its muscles to climbing down from where the ant nests in the forest canopy to a much more humid place near the forest floor and gets it to bite. And the last dying act of the ant is to bite into this leaf. And then the fungus just sort of takes over, and next slide. Okay. It grows into something like this, which makes proper mushrooms and sends spores off where other ants could find it. Turns out we actually have one of these in Texas, but they're hard to find. You have to be over kind of East Texas, down along the coast where the humidity's high. But there is one species of this zombie ant fungus we get here.
So before the ant even dies, they're manipulating the muscles of it to
get it to move to a part where that's optimal for fungal growth. So these supposedly mindless fungi, I mean, you saw them growing, doing their thing in the movie. Not only are they able to just sort of do their amazing growth and reproduction, they're able to co-opt an ostensibly more complex organism and change its behavior to suit itself.
Is there anything that does that for like humans?
Yes.
Great.
So
can you give me some fair warning over here?
Oh, so has anyone here had malaria? Yeah. Okay. So an older name for malaria is intermittent fever. It's a terrible disease. It's spread by mosquitoes, and malaria is terrible both for us. I mean, it kills probably 500,000 people every year, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, and mostly children. But it's also terrible for mosquitoes. Like, mosquitoes don't want malaria either. They get sick from it. It makes it hard for them to feed, and so their mouth parts get all clogged up. They don't put on weight well. They lay fewer eggs. It's kind of a mess for them. The last thing a mosquito wants is to bite a person sick with malaria. So anyway, the malaria parasite is making the mosquito sick, so it has to bite more because it can't feed properly, so it has to bite more hosts, and it gets to spread itself. But malaria also changes human physiology in that it gives us this intermittent fever, hot, then not hot, hot, then not hot. And it tends to raise our temperature in the evening when mosquitoes are biting, making us more attractive to mosquitoes. So the fever is designed by malaria, manipulates our physiology to spread itself better to a mosquito. So yes, there is a parasite that does that to us.
As long as we live in a place with no mosquitoes, we're fine, though. So
And then there's
that's
just rabies, so, you can get...
good. I knew it was a bad idea to come to work tonight. All right, so let's see. What's next here? Oh, what's this?
Oh, I just want to finish on wasps, because a lot of us think about wasps as these things. Anyone find these in their attic, get stung, right? These sort of standard wasps. But there is so much more to wasps than just your standard sort of stingy-looking paper wasp. So next. In fact, what most wasps do is they're really specialist parasites or predators of other arthropods. And the vast majority of wasp species will never sting you, both because they can't and because they don't really, they don't have nests to defend. They're solitary. They're out there not living in these groups that have like specialized stingy ones and other ones. They're just off on their own looking for prey. And this is a crown of thorn wasp that has found a grub living in a dead part of a tree branch, and I figure this is good for Texas. Drill, baby, drill. She's drilling down into the branch to find this grub and lay an egg. But it gets more complicated than that. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of wasps that do this, but next slide. All right. Here's one that does something similar, but it doesn't have that super long drill because it just finds a caterpillar and lays its eggs into it. And this wasp, this is, by the way, is a tomato hornworm. If you grow them on lab media, they're blue rather than green. They get that green color from feeding on your tomatoes. But if you get them in the lab, you can get this lovely blue caterpillar. But this wasp, if it lays an egg into the host, caterpillars, they're pretty amazing creatures. We saw them doing some trenching earlier, but they have their own defenses against the egg of the parasite. They'll try to wall it off and encapsulate it. But the wasp is able to get around that encapsulation because embedded in its genome is a virus. It used to be, if you look at the DNA sequence, it's related to just a free-living virus that just goes caterpillar to caterpillar, something like, the common cold for caterpillars. But this thing has somehow gotten embedded into the genome of the wasp. So when the wasp lays an egg, it's also laying these viruses that disable, it basically gives the caterpillar, an immune deficiency disease, and it can't fight against the egg. So then the eggs grow, and eventually the little caterpillars, the wasps have their own caterpillars. They finish feeding. The caterpillar's still alive at this point, by the way. It's just sort of emaciated, and the little grubs crawl out and pupate. Next slide. I just want to, this is all lead up because I had no idea what the face of these things look like. Here is the evil caterpillar, the evil wasp grub that's killing the caterpillar. It's like, yeah. It's crawling out and spinning a thing, yeah. Anyway, I think this is my last slide. And this is just to show that there's cool bugs around. Anyone know what this one is? Yeah, mantid fly. Well, you guys are good. Yeah, so this is not a mantis. It's not a fly. It's not a wasp, but this is a species of something called a mantis fly. They are parasites of spider eggs when they're young, and then they grow up, and they're related to lacewings. It's like common fluttery green things you get at your porch lights. And this one mimics a wasp to make it less likely, say, that a bird or something is going to try to eat it.
Thank you for your work in helping to expose the fact that nature is terrifying. We really appreciate it. Learned a lot more. Going to sleep a lot less. But also, these photographs are beautiful. I just wanted to just kind of make a quick note because you're a scientist. You take these photos. There's an aesthetic element to photographing these too. Like, where are your when you shoot these photos? Why do you do this? I should say, because I'm sure there's different reasons. this is probably not stuff that you're probably not doing a primary field of study when you're shooting these. You're probably shooting things that people are aware of, but you're shooting these beautiful photos. Why?
You know, I do now I'm curator of entomology at UT. It's my job to collect insects, but I used to be a much more prolific collector where I'd go out and could just have to have something. And collecting, it's essential for scientific stuff, but it's also a bit selfish in that, you know, you're taking a life from the world and putting it in a drawer and giving it a label. And that has useful scientific purposes. But when I discovered that I could collect photographs and sort of take an image of something and then have that, and that which is much easier to kind of pass around and show everyone, that to me was in many ways more satisfying. And, you know, it is scientifically less useful than a specimen. I will say that as a curator, but I just sort of started collecting photographs as well, not just of species, but of behaviors. And it also, for those of us who have really short attention spans, who are like, you know, going out and just kind of, oh, look at this, look at that, what do I do? Having that activity when I'm out in the field, the photography really helps me sit and focus and pay attention, because there's amazing things happening out there, like all sorts of stuff you'd never even think of.
Well, the photos are absolutely just stunning and amazing, and there's even more on your website, so people should check that out. And then also, I was curious because we just watched like the work of this guy who's making movies of this stuff. Have you thought about making moving images?
You know, I briefly flirted with wildlife videography about 10 years ago, and I even spent some time in the field with a BBC film crew. And what I learned was, no, I have no interest in in doing that. I mean, the thing about still photography is a still photograph, the responsibility is on the viewer most of the time. Like I can set up a photo and show an interesting behavior and get the lighting right and make some sort of subtle suggestions with the lines in a photo, what you should be looking at. But looking at a photo is a very personal thing. You can look at it, you can not look at it, you can spend however much amount of time you want on it. And this allows me, as someone who's creating these images, to do the best I can to make a nice image and sort of put it there, and then there you go. Turns out that as soon as that picture starts to move, you're in a whole different world, and the responsibility is suddenly back on the filmmaker for how the experience is going to go. And so I found that making video was a completely different field. Even though the equipment is essentially the same, there's this whole world of timing and pacing and audio where you're really you got a lot more control of what the story is and where it's going. And I decided that there are some people who are really good at that, who enjoy doing that, and I'm just going to walk around with my much lighter gear and take pictures of things.
That sounds like a good plan, and I'm glad you have, because I've really learned a lot from looking at your photos. I want to, you'll be around, hanging around, and so you'll get to meet and greet some of these people who it seems like have been packed from the local world of academia, from the knowledge that we see here. So feel free to come up and say hi in the lobby. I want to thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate the insight that you've brought to this evening.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for inviting me. This has been a lot of fun.
And thanks all of you for coming.
Yep.